Hey gardeners, thanks for watching the Urban Gardener channel. It's our summer season. Now let's get growing. All right, everyone, welcome to Let's Get Growing, your weekly gardening live cast right here on the Urban Gardener channel. My name is Enoch, and I'm going to be your host today. We have a couple of really great guests to join with us on the program today. Later on, we have Gary Pilarchik of the Rusted Garden joining with us as our featured guest. And this week's channel of the week, we have Paul from Guten Gardening. So be sure to stay tuned for all of those great gardening conversations with our really great guests this week. And I hope that all of you are having a wonderful gardening week yourself. And if you're joining with us here live, be sure to leave a comment for us in our chat box there. Any comments or questions or anything like that. And we'll try to get to those here a little bit later in the show. And if you have any questions for our guests, be sure to ask those as well too. And we can ask them to our guests while we're talking to them as well. And also be sure to hit that like button there. Give us a big thumbs up for our show and all of our great guests. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed so far. Hit the bell notification so you can be notified of all of our upcoming episodes. And of course, be sure to share our show and our channel with all of your garden friends and your garden groups, and let everybody know that we're out here having some really fun gardening conversations here on our channel with some really awesome gardeners. And as well too, go check out our website at letsgetgrowing.live. There you can see all of our upcoming guests and check out even some of our previous guests as well too. Plus you can sign up for our newsletter as well as join in on the show. You can do one of our audience introductions or share with us some of your garden stories and be featured in our garden features here later on in the season. And yeah, it's really great to have all of you here with us today. Really glad to get things started back up here. We've actually been kind of on a little bit of a break over the last couple of weeks, kind of our late spring before summer break. Now we're just getting started with our summer season here on the Let's Get Growing show. Plus, we've got all sorts of really great content lined up for you as well, too, for the Urban Gardener channel. We should have a new garden journal video coming up here real soon. And we'll be doing some real fun garden tours and different things like that in our various different garden projects that we have here as well, too. We've got so much going on right now. It is that busy time of the garden season, and I've been just working, trying to get everything together, and also kind of trying to catch up from being behind on a lot of things because of my situation here in the gardens over the last several months. But everything's all good now. We're all set to go, and so I'm really enjoying getting out there in the gardens and getting things planted out, and everything's starting to take shape and looking really good. A lot of our cold season crops are probably fastly coming to an end here in our garden. I expect a lot of things to start heading to seed here real soon because just like the last couple of years here for us, I garden out of Southern Oregon here on the West Coast. And last couple of seasons, it seems like we've got a nice spring. Everything looks really great. The weather's perfect. And then all of a sudden, summer just decides to drop on us out of nowhere. In fact, we had our first 90-degree day a few weeks ago towards the end of April. And now over the last few weeks, we've been kind of hovering around the 90 degrees. And so I'm just anticipating that summer's just gonna start rolling on us here, and we're just gonna have to keep moving on. I've got all sorts of different things though for our summer crops all seeded out, and our plant seedlings and starts are pretty much all ready to get out into the garden, and it's about time to get working on all of that. And we've got tons of different things that I want to get growing this year. We've got lots of tomatoes, lots of peppers, squash, cucumbers, melons, all sorts of things that are ready to get planted out in the garden. So, for this week's conversation, though, too, is we'll get with everybody here a little bit later in the show. I want to hear about all the things that you've got growing on, or the different seedlings and starts that you're getting planted out in your garden. So be sure to jump into our comment section and our chat box here and join the conversation. Let me know what you have growing on in your gardens right now as well, too. And again, I want to thank you all so much for joining with me here too. So let's get started with our first segment of the show. And as we talked about in our last show a couple of weeks ago, we've been doing In the Garden with our friend Mark Roche Colbert, but he's had to take a leave from the show in order to help out his wife, who is dealing with a cancer diagnosis recently. So we wish him and his family all the best, and we look forward to possibly having him back on the show later on down the road. But for now, we're just going to kind of man the In the Garden segment ourselves, and hopefully everything will be going all right with that as well too. So let's check out what I've got going on in the garden. So this week in the garden, I'm talking about hardening off our indoor grown plant seedlings. Now, we get all of our seedlings started several weeks before our last frost date here under our seed starting station, which is just basically a few different shop lights hanging from a PVC apparatus that I built several years ago. Now, our shop lights are really simple. They're just, I think, about 5,000 lumen daylight bulbs, and those do really well at getting our seedlings started and growing. But the issue with those is that it's only so much light, and they got to get out into the garden under the real sun. But we can't just take these right from our seed starting station and throw them right out into the sun. Otherwise, they're just going to get really burnt up, because that sunlight is a lot more extreme than these bulbs are. So we've got to kind of take it easy on them and kind of give them just a little bit of an adjustment to that new light. So the process of getting these hardened off to be in the sunlight full time is going to take a few days. And what we're going to do is take these seedlings from indoors under the shop lights on day one. We're just going to put them in a nice shady spot outdoors. Now, there's still a lot of light that's in this shade, especially on a nice sunny day like we've got today. So they are getting just a little bit more light than what's coming off of those shop lights. And so a good shady day to get them started off on day one is a great way to get them started. Now, one of the things you want to consider when hardening off your plants is the time of day that you are bringing your plants out. I prefer to do mine earlier in the day, but you might not have that time available to do so, and you only have mid or late day to do that. Just consider that the intensity of the sun is just going to be a little bit more during those midday times, and you'll want to kind of cut back the time that you're having them outside. And also, one of the things you can do in order to help with timing is to use some of those spaces in your garden that eventually turn to shade by using some walls or different things in your garden that will eventually shade out the plants. Now, you just have to know your garden spaces in order to know where that's going to happen. But it's a good way to make sure that in case you kind of forget about it for a minute, you're not leaving them out in the intense sun for too long. And also, you want to consider the fact that these plants, again, have been growing indoors, and it's also warmer indoors than it is at nighttime. So, over those first day or two that we're leaving them in the shade, and these first few days that we're bringing them into the sun, we're also taking them back indoors in order to also eventually acclimate them to being outdoors overnight as well. So, after having them in the shade for a couple of days, we're bringing them into the sun for those first couple of days for just an hour or so, is what I do. And then I'll move them back into the shade for just a little bit, and then I'll bring them indoors. And then we'll gradually each day increase the time that we're allowing them to be in the sun. And then I would say maybe day 5, 6, or so, then we're going to start gradually allowing them to stay outdoors during the evening just a little bit longer. And then about 7 to 10 days of doing this and increasing our time, we're going to have plants that are ready to be not only left outdoors all day long, but also all night long as well too. And once they've done and gone through all of that process, they're going to be ready to plant out into your garden. A couple of other things to consider while you're harvesting off your indoor plant seedlings is the overall weather conditions in your area. Now, for me in my forecast, we've got full sun ahead of us, and I want to make sure that I'm really gradually bringing them out into that sunlight in order to ensure the best results. But for you, you might have some cloudy or overcast conditions in your
Hmm.
forecast. So if that's the case, then you can
Horrible.
increase
What
that
happened to the
time
sun?
just a bit. Now, if I'm going to have them out for just an hour in the full sun, I might do 2 hours in some really overcast or filtered sunlight through those clouds. And you want to consider the wind as well too. You could have just a nice moderately windy day, which would be really great for your plant starts because that'll just help the stems and the roots get nice and strong. But if it's going to be really windy out, you might want to prepare for those conditions as well too, because you don't want your plants just getting whipped all over the place, because like having them out in the sun just a little too long, that's going to maybe cause some damage or stunt the growth of your plant starts. Now, hopefully, you've got enough good information here to help you get your indoor plant starts hardened off really well. But this is something that really you're going to have to gain some experience on, and knowing not just your area, but the temperament of your different plants that you're growing. And hopefully, you'll get them out into the garden nice and healthy and nice and strong. So that'll be our In the Garden for this week. We'll see you all in the garden this next Saturday. All right, all right. So there we go. Just a little bit of information on hardening off all of your indoor plant starts that you get started indoors. We get a lot of different things started indoors. Again, like I was saying in the video, several weeks before our last frost date, so that we can get all of those plants a nice head start on the season and get them growing. Again, I kind of wish I had gotten a better head start this year, like I usually do in normal years, but everything's growing so well right now. I'm looking forward to having all of them doing just fine in the garden this year as well too. All right. So, moving along on the show here, I want to get the conversation started with our first guest this week on our Channel of the Week segment.
Hi, Ultimate Gardeners.
Hi, my name is Nathan.
Hey guys, what's up? I'm Rachel.
Hi, Ultimate Gardeners.
Whoa, we don't need to see that twice. All right. For our first channel of the week of our summer season, we have with us um, Paul from Guten Gardening. And Paul and his family have been gardening in Wisconsin for the past 7 years. What started as a 3 foot by 3 foot raised bed has transformed now to the entire exterior of their small property and a good bit of their indoor space as well. They have been sharing their journey. Oh, they've been sharing their journey on YouTube for nearly 3 years. Their goal of food self sufficiency started with one small step of reducing the produce they were buying at the store and has now expanded to growing nearly all of their needed fruits and vegetables and raising enough quail to provide all the eggs and some of the protein they need as well. They hope to encourage as many others to give more attention to gardening, whether that means attempting gardening for the first time, expanding their current garden spaces, or growing as much of their food as possible. All right, everyone, let's welcome to the show Paul from Guten Gardening. How are you doing, Paul? It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I am fantastic. A beautiful day here.
Awesome. Awesome. Excellent. Again, thanks for joining with us on the show. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your YouTube channel, Guten Gardening.
Well, thank you very much. We started this actually right at the beginning of COVID a couple years ago. I was able to take a little bit of extra time to do something we've wanted to do for a long time, which is to show some of what we're doing in our, we'll call it a gardening journey, and what we're developing, and share some of what we have been trying to learn as a part of the process of becoming better gardeners and more effective gardeners. And so that's where our channel itself came from. But the process of gardening for us hasn't actually been a long one, because even though I grew up on a farm up until I was about 5 years old, and I remember some pieces of gardening from that time. I remember specifically, I think I was probably 7 years old. I went back down to the farm to visit my grandparents, and I remember they sent me outside to sit on a 5-gallon bucket and pick green beans, which at the time, the thing I remember the most from that is my back hurting, the sun being really, really hard on my head, which may be why I wear a hat. But I remember those pieces, but it really wasn't an integral part of our lives here up until about 7 years ago. And I truly believe that gardening is one of those very healthy addictions out there, because we started,
Yes.
as I said, at that 3x3 bed. And I think, if I remember correctly, we tried to grow a summer squash, a watermelon, and then we had a bunch of other stuff packed in there that didn't do much of anything because it was packed too tightly. But that experience, brings back a lot of, I guess, a lot of memories from some of those pieces from childhood. But it's that experience of watching things grow, of developing, that pushed us to say, well, what else can we do on our property? And from that point forward, we bought another 3x3 raised bed, which is the last time we bought a raised bed that I can remember. And we made it so that we could extend it to become a 3x9 bed by getting rid of the sides. We expanded that year, and then we just started getting rid of lawn. And believe it or not, that's a lot of work to get rid of lawn, but we got rid of a lot of lawn, and we're at a point now where, between raised beds, between the root stout gardening that we do, and vertical gardening, etc., we don't have very much of a lawn to mow, to take care of it all. It's just food, food, food. So that's where we came from. It's not been a long time, but we certainly have been learning a lot along the way.
Awesome. Yeah, excellent. That's, really great. And like you said, coming out of like the pandemic and being kind of at home a lot and all of that is really, I think, kind of help flourish the whole like gardening community and show people a lot about how important doing some of that stuff is as well too, which is a lot of what you cover on your channel. So real quick though, when was your actual first gardening experience?
So, I mean, as somebody who grew up on a farm, I don't know if we could call it gardening so much as farming. Not that they're different, but they kind of are. I do remember going out, even as a 3 or 4 year old. It's some of my early memories. I would say, going out and picking corn, and and being there with my grandfather as we went up, taking care of bales of hay and corn and everything else. But getting out there and just pulling it off. It's also my first introduction to earwigs.
Oh God.
But it wasn't a bad experience because actually, that was first time I ever had corn raw, but getting in there and experiencing that. And then, my grandfather also grew a pretty good number of tomatoes, and tomatoes are one of those crops where you kind of get spoiled eating the ones that you get at the store and the taste of those versus when you have them fresh. And so I remember
Right.
that from a very young age, just experiencing corn and tomatoes. Those are the two things that stand out to me as my earliest memories.
Excellent. Yeah, yeah. Oh, those darn earwigs too, man. I'm telling you, they have been the bane of my existence in my garden space for sure. I mean, they just I'm still, I've tried almost every tactic there is. I'm trying to deal with them and get rid of them, but they just seem to, like, I don't know. No matter what you kind of throw at them, they seem to kind of even resist that and then show up even stronger the next year. So,
Yeah, yeah,
oh man, but
they're creepy looking too. It doesn't help that the way they look.
I remember, yeah, yeah, I remember, a lot of bugs I've been kind of okay with throughout my life, especially when I was younger and I was a kid. And, a lot of them that would really kind of, like, especially like spiders. I've always really kind of been fascinated with spiders and that sort of thing, which would really creep out most people. But I remember seeing my first earwig when I was younger, and it was the creepiest thing, and it still is today. But and I
So
hate seeing them
we,
anytime I do in the garden, and especially it's one thing to see one of them, but when you run into like a nest of them where they're all different sizes and they're running all over the place, they're scurrying as they do pretty much.
I don't want to go too far down this necessarily, but I do remember my grandmother, and she had a chicken coop that she modified to be just a storage space because they got rid of their chickens. And the door to it was a big sliding wooden door. And I remember very distinctly, I was probably 8 or 9, opening that door, and the nest of them just fell right in front of me because they
Oh,
were right up on top of the door, hadn't been opened at all. It's
oh.
a moment you don't. That's a scarring moment.
Oh, that certainly would be. Oh my, I can't even imagine. I just can't even imagine. I mean, like I said, I'm really cool with most bugs and most things that you find in the garden. It's those earwigs that just completely
Mm,
creep me out. Oh, yeah. Again, and again, like you said, it's their look. You look at that little hook at the end of them.
mm,
And just imagine them
absolutely.
grabbing a hold of you or something. But no thanks.
We're so
All
much
right.
bigger, and yet.
Awesome, awesome. So what is it in the garden? What do you enjoy most in your garden space? What, about the whole process of gardening?
Yeah, I mean, I think life is pretty stressful no matter what. We all have to deal
Mm,
with stress in our own way. We all are busy. I don't think I can discount anybody and say that somebody's busier than I. I don't know how you quantify that, but
yeah.
to me, it's kind of like I would say fishing or camping or something like that. Time just seems to slow down a little bit when you're out in the garden. Maybe it's because everything else is there aren't the distractions. There's just the nature, the birds, the experience of being out there. And to me, that experience is what makes one of the things that makes it so particularly special. And today even I got out around 6:30 this morning, get a little bit of work done. And, I'm an early morning person no matter what, but there's nothing going on out there except what I need to get done. And I'm moving my hands in the earth. And yeah, it's just the overall experience is relaxing, enjoyable. And I know the end product, there may be some frustration along the way, but the end product is going to be something I'm going to really, and my family is really going to enjoy.
Yes, absolutely. And something I talk about all the time is, that's the one thing I think I really found out of the whole gardening experience myself was that, that kind of time where you just got, you got kind of a peaceful time to yourself to kind of analyze and reflect on everything else that's going on. You get the chance to kind of process things in a way by taking care of these different spaces and plants and different things like that. I mean, I'm one of those people who, I have a few kind of automatic watering systems set up around my gardening, but I really enjoy just hand watering things and being able to take that time, just kind of walking around the garden and being able to, again, reflect on things and think about things and all of that. And that just really kind of helps kind of bring a little bit of serenity to your life a little bit.
Yes.
And I think that's probably, above all of the food and all that sort of stuff that we get to grow, which is great, which I think is probably the second best thing out of the garden. But that's, that peace of mind that we get after taking the time in our garden space is always such a valuable thing that we get from our gardening experience.
Yeah, they call it garden therapy for a reason. I mean, it truly is cathartic. I remember a T-shirt that said the best day fishing is better, or the worst day fishing is better than the best day at work. Well, the worst day of gardening is better than just about anything else I can think of, and it's a family affair. I mean, I have a couple, I have two children and my wife, and we get out there together. So it's a shared experience. It's something that I know is generational. So if we can pass on a love to our children, then that's a practice that's going to benefit their families and their families. And so, a big picture, it's just a phenomenal craft and experience.
Yeah, awesome. That's nothing more better to do as well too than to share the experience with others. And when you got a family and young kids to be able to do that, that's really awesome. Be able to bring them up with that experience, I think is a really great thing for young kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's see, what are some of your favorite things to grow in your garden?
Well, that's
it's
actually not it's a hard question, but it's kind of, in a way, it's not, I guess, for us. We have 490 videos now, and if you search potato on ours, you probably find sweet potato and potato take up about 25 to 28% of those videos, because I absolutely love the experience of growing both of those. I mean, there's so many other vegetables I could mention, but those stand out, not just because of the, especially for sweet potatoes, the nutritional benefit, but the experience of a harvest of something that you can't, I mean, you can check on by pulling some early potatoes, but you don't see what's happening. And then we call it treasure hunting around here, but the experience of going through that harvest and finding what's below the surface and seeing what that 90, 100, 110 days has looked like, what that's transformed into. I think that experience is something like no other. And so I would say potatoes, tomatoes, those are our favorites. I'm sorry, potatoes and sweet potatoes. Tomatoes, though, are one of my personal favorites. Just I call it garden candy. It's the cherry tomatoes in general. I don't know. When I'm walking the garden, we've got lots of berry bushes, etc. But I'm walking the garden and I want a snack, I can pop over, grab some tomatoes, and just keep going. So, yeah, it's a hard question. It's an easy question. I don't know how to say it, but we've grown so many varieties of different things that I'm going to stick with my potato, sweet potato answer. And even though we're in a cold weather zone, I mean, moderately cold zone with zone 5 here in Wisconsin, and sweet potatoes are a little harder to grow here. I think partly, there's a shorter growing season. It's still something we like to do. We just got 500 sweet potato slips in, plus the ones that we started here. So we're planning to grow a ton of them this year.
Oh yeah, the 500. Are they all different varieties?
Yeah, we got 8 different varieties that we order. We got them from Taterman, and we've done that the last couple of years. They've done a pretty nice job. It was a George's Plant Farm, and a couple new varieties to us. A couple tried and true varieties that we've done well with: the Beauregard, Georgia Jet, and Centennial. Some of the ones that we really love the taste of, that have produced nice size sweet potatoes for us. And so. But yeah, we should have, I think this year, all told, we'll end up with somewhere like 10 different varieties of sweet potatoes that we're going to be planting and
Wow.
growing.
That's
So,
awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and I really share with you that idea that growing potatoes is fun because of the mystery that kind of
yeah,
goes along with it. Although, I mean, if people who have followed my channel are seeing, I grow most all of my potatoes. In fact, this year, because of a friend, we have some in-ground space, so that'll be the first time I'm really growing potatoes in ground. Most of the time, because we do small space gardening on the channel, we do them in these large, storage containers.
sure.
And some years are really successful and some years not so much. And
Yeah,
again, too, it all comes down to that experience of the harvest. And I'm telling you, it always seems and it kind of worries me now too. Whenever I'm out there and I look at the container potatoes and I've got these big, giant, thriving plants that just look awesome. Early on, I'd be like, oh, this is going to be great. These are going to be awesome, and then I would dig in and find these little tiny things and not so much of anything. And then I'd have these plants that were just kind of moderate and not so bad, and then I would pull out these big giant things out of
yeah.
them on those seasons and stuff too. So every time I see my plants are huge and thriving, I get to worrying. And
There's
again
so
too,
many
it's like,
factors. Yeah, there's so many
yeah.
factors. The shade, I mean, everything changes each year too. So I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and usually probably just a little bit too much nitrogen is probably the
Yep.
issue when it comes to big giant flourishing leaves and plants and all of that sort of thing. But it's exactly like you said, it's a treasure hunt, and you don't get to know what the treasure is until you start pulling them up out of the ground. So again, it's one of the, again, it's one of those things that's kind of fun in the garden because you get that experience of growing them and taking care of them, tending the space and everything like that. But ultimately, you wait until that day you get to pull them out of the ground and find out everything that you have, and it's really
Absolutely.
great.
And they're so versatile, not just when you eat them, the different ways you can grow them. There's so many opportunities and options, I should say. Like you, we do a ton of container gardening because we don't have a huge space. And so
Hmm.
container, we've done some vertical in hay vertical. We've done the roost out, which has been fantastic. And I know a couple of people in the comments were talking about the problem with snails and other critters out there, but we've had to deal with some of that as well. Try not necessarily snails, but some of the other animals coming in and trying to snack on our food too. So that's the other challenge I think with these root crops like sweet potatoes is everything looks great and then you pull one up and for us it's voles, but they've come in
Oh,
and they've eaten half of it and you see what would have been huge turned into a little thin piece of nothing that you can't even use. So
oh, man, I feel for you and everyone else who has to deal with those types of pest issues. Mine are mostly bugs and different things like that. I don't really have too much of a worry when it comes to animals and that sort of thing getting into it. But I hear so much of people who have to deal with that, from voles to deer,
ooh,
being, these things that just come in and ravage what you're, all those efforts you put into everything. And I just couldn't imagine pulling things up and finding again too, waiting all that time to, find that harvest and find that when you pull them out would be just really devastating. But and
no,
luckily for you, you're growing so much, which is
right.
always my key to growing things when you're dealing with pests and everything is grow more than you need. That way, in case you do deal with some sort of pest devastation or something like that, you'll have plenty for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. We had 3 years ago, we had 120 corn stalks coming in, and the corn was looking nice. And at harvest time, I'm sure a day, 2 days before harvest, we had a raccoon or two come in. And I don't think I've ever been angry in the garden until that day because, they would take each one off. It looked like a person came in, take each one off, peel it down, take a
Oh
bite, and
my.
throw it. And so our entire line of corn was wiped out. The pests can be something else, absolutely
Oh,
something else.
yes, yes. More so than weeds, they're just truly the bane of any gardener's
Yeah,
existence for sure. Absolutely.
absolutely.
All right. So do you have any least favorite things to grow in the garden? Things that just either don't like, don't eat, or, are just cause too much of a hassle for you when you're growing?
That's such a hard question because
It
one of the
is.
things we preach on the channel is to grow what you know you'll eat. And
Mm-hmm.
so most everything that we grow, we know we're going to like. So I guess the way I'll handle that question is to say this. There have been a few things we've planted that we now can't get rid of because they so vigorously self-seed. Like
Oh
if you
yeah.
go around my property right now, you're going to find strawberry spinach everywhere in containers. It's like, I don't know how. It's been 4 years, I want to say, since we planted, maybe three plus years since we planted it. I don't know how to get rid of it. I've tried
Wow.
everything, and I pull it up before the berries come into the. And if I don't know how many people know what strawberry spinach is, but it doesn't taste like strawberries. It's not bad, but the red berries, which is the reason why I think you would grow it, so
Yeah.
they have so many seeds, and so that's everywhere. And I would also say I like chamomile well enough, but that's everywhere in our garden too. I think we initially planted that in two spots, and now that's
Yeah.
every. You can find it in our walkway. It's coming up through one of the area between a brick right now. I just
Yeah.
noticed outside. So some of those that we don't have as much use for, but that still show up everywhere, I would
Mm-hmm.
say those would probably be my, if we had to say a least favorite. They're still usable. They're still
Yeah.
fine in many ways, but when they're that aggressive, I'll take a step back from them.
Yeah, that's for sure. For me this year in a similar situation I have is I've got a little herb garden. So I've got all sorts of things, oreganos, mints, dill, chives, all sorts of things growing in there. But the one thing I did, and I knew well enough, let's just grow it make sure it's in a container like all of our mints and everything, because they'll spread around or they'll get everywhere, is lemon balm.
Uh-huh.
You get one, if you miss one seed pod or one seed stem coming off of this sort of thing, you're gonna, oh man, and it's everywhere right now. It's like you
Yeah,
said, it's growing up out of the rocks and the cracks and all over in any space. And even because I grow down an alleyway as well too, and it's up at the front of the alleyway, the herb garden. So going down the alleyway, you see it popping up all over the place. And
that's
another
good to
one
hear.
that's really strangely like that, which took a few years before it actually stopped popping up all over the place after I let one go to seed one year, was tomatillos. Or I
Oh,
let a couple of them go, or birds spread them around. But I had tomatillo plants growing like wild all over the place for a couple of years. And it's amazing. You wouldn't necessarily think a plant like that produces a fruit is going to spread all over the place like that. I don't really know how it actually does it, but yeah.
we had in our community garden space, which I was working on earlier today. It's a pretty good area, but we had only planted some winter squash and corn. Those were our primary pieces over there last year, and some sweet potatoes. But we had 3 or 4 tomatillos pop up that we
Yeah.
definitely didn't plant. And so my guess is when they clear out the whole area, they plow whatever's there. You're right. It seeds everywhere. I've definitely seen that as well. But I guess in a way, it's somewhat like when I say with tomatoes, if especially cherry tomatoes, you plant it once, you probably never have to really plant it again because those seeds are going to be everywhere.
Yep.
But I like tomatoes
Yeah,
a lot,
definitely.
so it's not a problem.
Yes, yes, and that's how I got us set up with one of my favorite cherry tomato varieties. And I have a certain space, and I do, I purposely leave behind the biggest, juiciest looking ones, and I let them just, ripen up and literally just fall off themselves off of the plant, and then I get them to reseed every single year. And we're like 8 years in a row now, just having them just volunteer. I don't even have to think about seeding them or planting them ahead of time, and then I get my favorite variety of tomatoes just popping
Phenomenal.
up every single year. Yeah, so they're really great. And but on the same time though, is that they fall and they drop right there in that spot, you know
Yeah, hundreds in
and
one
that's
area.
where you can look forward to them popping up the next time. I mean, tomatillos, for some reason, those seeds find themselves all over the place. And a similar relative of the tomatillo is the ground cherry, and that's the one.
Yes,
That one is the one I really would like to see that sort of thing happen. I wouldn't mind those volunteering everywhere, like the tomatillo does. But yeah, those are really good.
yeah, absolutely. I love ground cherries.
All right. So, what along the way of your gardening experience and everything inspired you to start a YouTube channel and share all of this with everybody out there?
What's really funny about having a YouTube channel is that you have a record of everything, and then you can go back and look at your first couple of
Hmm.
videos, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. But well, quality changes over time. But
That's right.
but I mean, I had something I wanted to. We had something we wanted to share, and I think and I know our first video was setting up our worm bin, our vermiculture setup, like a homemade setup. And in conversation with my wife, we talked about how we're doing all of this. We're trying our best to expand, to take away the necessity to be dependent on the store for our produce. We think it's important. We think it's good for our family. We think there's a lot that we have to share. And if we can expand our audience to reach more people, to encourage more people to try this, to really teach what we're learning as we go. And I think I try to make this very clear on our channel. I've never claimed to be an expert at what we do, but I am somebody who loves to learn and who's willing to
Hmm.
share exactly what our path takes. And that was
Yeah.
it. We saw this and we said, hey, we're doing this work. We think
Hmm.
other people can take advantage of some of the same things we're taking advantage of, can learn from from our mistakes, from our ability to do the things that we do here. So why not take the opportunity and share that out with as many people as we can? And on top of that, a big part of what we try to do here is to give back to our community, our YouTube community in particular. And so that's a piece. I mean, earlier December through February, we did our 31 days of giving, where we tried to give things to people who are part of our community, to give them another opportunity to move forward with whatever their gardening practice was. And so I think for me and for us as a family, it all comes full circle to being, we're sharing what we have. We're sharing what we have as a part of our journey and that learning. And then we're trying to encourage other people to do the same thing because we know how beneficial it is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And very similar for me, I started on the encouragement of others around me who saw the sort of things I was doing, because my gardening space is really kind of open to the public. I kind of have an open back space, just a back cemented patio. I do all these, small space containers, elevated raised beds. We're along an alleyway, which me and my neighbor also both kind of utilize those sides of the alleyway in order to grow things and all of that. We also, I mean, early on, before I started my channel, we're growing. I had a really cool container pepper patch up on top of a carport rooftop that we have off of our space. And people just walk by and we're always just kind of fascinated and asking me questions about things. And every now and then I'd get people who are like, you need to share this. You make videos or anything? I'd get questions on that. So that kind of encouraged me, because I'd already been a huge fan of just gardening learning on YouTube and social media, and that's where I really kind of learned and got inspired to do a lot of the different things that I was doing. So it just kind of seemed to be kind of a natural thing for me to just kind of go ahead and move on into that space myself and start sharing everything. And then also similar, and I like what you said about, the idea that you're learning, you don't, it's not necessarily that, and I kind of struggle with the idea myself of saying that I'm a teacher of gardening, because I think there's just so many great people out there that have so much individual knowledge on all sorts of aspects of gardening that are doing YouTube channels already and giving some really great advice, including our guest we got coming up here later, someone I've been following for many years and
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
does tons of really great videos, Gary Pilarchik, The Rusted Garden. And but I wanted to kind of give a chance to kind of show kind of the uniqueness of my garden, but in the same time, kind of more or less just kind of a garden experience versus a garden education. Even though we're learning things, we're teaching the things that I'm learning and all that sort of stuff as well too. But I really kind of consider it just more of kind of a garden adventure, in a way, kind of, they call it vlogs, call it a video diary or that sort of thing, because what you mentioned at the beginning is that you get to look back at all of this stuff. Even if it is a little cringeworthy, some of those early videos and all of that, but
I
but
think I love that. I love that about gardening is I'm
yeah,
not going to sit here and say this is how you have to do this
right.
thing,
Hmm.
because what works for me might not work for somebody else. Plus, who am I to say this is the number one way? But for both of us, we can sit there and say, I'm exposing you to a way that worked for me, or that this
Yep.
worked this way for me. Give it a try.
Yeah, exactly. Just kind of just showing that experience to other people, and try to be encouraging on that sort of level. And again, showing those things that work for me and kind of relay those a little bit. And, gardening is a constant learning process. You should always be trying different things. And, especially if you're looking for success in some stuff and you're just not finding it, reach out, try, do different things, experiment with things. That's kind of the fun of gardening in the long run. I always say, if you're not learning, you're not gardening.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right. So, you got anything fun planned ahead for your garden or your channel or anything that you can share with everybody?
Well, we are in the season of trying to get everything out. I'll say that. I thought your opening segment was very appropriate. We've got a whole
Yeah.
bunch of stuff hardening off on our porch right now. It's been out there for about a week and a half, and so we're in that mode of I'm so busy right now kind of mode. But we're doing some experimenting around with some true potato seeds. We've had to restart a couple of times, but that's exciting. We have a bunch of vertical gardening work that we're going to be doing this year. I'm really excited for the green stalk, but also we have some homemade, we call them vertical roost out beds, but basically they're old tomato cages that are 4 foot tall, filled with hay that's now in year 2. I'm excited to see what we can do with that this year. And just a ton of work coming up, a ton of content. I'm actually got a video that's going to come out a little bit later today where we take a look at some of our potatoes that we overwintered in some sand in a bucket. And I don't want to spoil anything there, but sweet potato content, hashtag team potato and team sweet potato coming up.
Yes.
But all around, it's just a busy time, and we've got a ton of great content coming up on the channel. Yeah, that's it. We're many and
Awesome.
varied things.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I really enjoy all of the things that you do on your channel. And for everybody who's watching, be sure to get down in the description there, follow a link, go subscribe to Paul and his channel, Guten Gardening, and see all of those fun things coming up, and learn a little bit about some potatoes.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right, Paul. Again, thank you so much for joining with us here on the Let's Get Growing show. It's really awesome to have you, and it was a great gardening conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having us. Okay.
Absolutely. We'll see you again
Have a
soon.
great day. Yes.
Ivy Organic brand products are innovative, organic, effective, and USA made products to help make this your best growing season. Hi, my name is Charles Malky, biologist and plant expert with Ivory Organics, where we grow cool plants and author Saving the World with the Home Garden. Ivory Organic brand products has a product for you, whether you be an organic orchard or a backyard grower that's trying to do things right. Ivory Organics has a product for you. Ivory Organic all-purpose fertilizers are unlike most fertilizers on the market in the sense that it has all 6 plant macronutrients. These are nutrients that plants need in abundance. Most people are just focused, and most people have only been trained to focus on the NPK, but Ivory Organic brand fertilizers deliver all 6 plant macronutrients, which include your nitrogen for your greening and growth, phosphorus for flowers and fruit, and also in the summertime helps with the drought resistance of the plant. Potassium, important for root development, disease resistance, and then the other 3 macronutrients that Ivory Organic all-purpose fertilizers have include magnesium, which is the heart of the chlorophyll molecule, sulfur, important for the greening and the metabolic processes within the plant, and number 6, and actually about 1/3 of the plant's weight, is calcium.
All right, all right. And again, too, as we mentioned on this show, a good way to support what we're doing here on the Let's Get Growing show is to support our sponsor, Ivy Organics, and be sure to go to their website, check out their fertilizer they have, and also they have this really cool 3-in-1 plant guard that you can use for all of your fruit trees. I really recommend what they have there. And also be sure to utilize our promo code GROW10 in their shop so that you can save 10% off of everything that they have there as well too. So awesome. So really great again to have Paul from Guten Gardening with us joining there. And again, be sure to check out the links down below so that you can go and check out everything that they have growing on their channel as well too. And again, everybody get into the comment section there and ask any questions or anything like you might have for our guest that we have coming up here in just a moment, or anything else you might want to talk about. We did get a question early on in the show from Joe, who asked if there was any early season surprises, probably talking about what I was talking about earlier. And for me, so far, again, I just got to kind of reiterate the biggest early season surprise for me is something I think I'm probably just going to have to start getting used to when it comes to growing in my area, is this just really early onset of summer weather. I mean, it's just really starting to get warm. I mean, most of my, cool weather crops, some of them are just really getting started and really getting going in the garden right now. And, you know, uh, most of them are probably going to start shooting up shooting up to seed now because of all of this warm weather, which is kind of a reaction, a lot of your lettuces and greens and has to some of this warm weather. And especially my spinach. And luckily I've gotten some really good harvests out of it so far, but I'm expecting those to go to seed here in these next few days, as our weather just seems to be pretty consistent into the forecast as far as all of this heat and everything that we're dealing with. So again, I don't know if it's necessarily a surprise, but it is definitely something new that we're dealing with in the garden over the last couple of seasons, as some of the climate and things are really changing here on the West Coast, so just gonna have to develop some strategies, get our things started just a bit earlier, and those sort of things that I'll be working on this next season as we go into our cold season and come out of it as well too. This last year I didn't have much of an opportunity to really get a lot of my overwintering gardening and all those sort of things done because of the situation that I was dealing with here in my garden spaces, of whether or not we were going to be staying in those spaces. And so I didn't want to get a bunch of things started that I wasn't going to be able to complete or fulfill. And we got all of that stuff all squared away over these last few weeks. And so I'm really kind of looking forward to really be able to strategize on doing things just a little bit earlier, or working on things in a more overwinter type of situation where we can utilize some strategies to make sure that we're getting even more out of our garden spaces when it comes to our cool weather crops. Because again, summer just really wants to come and get to us really, really quick here. So we're just going to have to deal with that, move on to all of the other great things that we have going for our garden with all of these starts. I mean, I've got tons and tons of things that we seeded out several weeks ago that I'm really working on right now, getting out into the garden. And really excited about seeing all of that stuff grow this year. Some new varieties of different melons and squash and all sorts of different things that we're getting started with too. So really looking forward to all of that, and looking forward to talking with our next guest here on the show. Someone that I've been following for many, many years. When I first started gardening, all of the things that I was learning, I was, going to YouTube for and following all these really great YouTube gardeners. And there's, a good handful of them that have been doing it for a long time. And I've been really getting so much great information from, and definitely a lot from our next upcoming guest here on the channel for our featured guest. This week's featured guest on the channel, or on the Let's Get Growing show, is Gary Pilarchik of the Rusted Garden. And Gary is the host, he's the host of the Rusted Garden. He's given viewers an unbiased information for them to use in their gardens. He covers all aspects of vegetable gardening, from seed starting to tending, harvesting, cooking, and provides tools and ideas to battle garden pests and diseases. He has nearly 2,000 garden videos and is also the author of the book, The Modern Homestead Garden. So let's welcome onto the show our friend and gardener, Gary Pilarchik. Gary, awesome. Thanks for joining with us here on Let's Get Growing.
Very happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So let's tell everybody a little bit more about yourself and your gardening channel.
So my garden channel, The Rusted Garden, is, I think, 12 years old now. So I started way back before I moved to this property that I'm on now, and just wanted to make a video. And I was like, oh, there's a million videos on growing tomatoes. But I thought it was just a cool platform, and got started. 12 years later, I have a pretty good following, have a great passion for teaching. I just want people to get out into the garden, not be overwhelmed, and really get started growing vegetables. The best way to learn is to kind of, maybe watch a couple of my videos, listen to you a couple of times. But once you get the information, get out in the garden, start digging, start planting, and get started.
Yes, absolutely. Just get going, just get growing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key, and like I find with gardening that there's just so many things, sort of things we touched on with the last guest and all of that. There's just so many benefits and so many things that's of value that you get out of gardening and the whole gardening experience. So let's take a little step back and talk a little bit about your garden history. What was your first gardening experience?
It goes back to probably second grade, when my grandfather would come over. Back then, it was a 6-pack of tomatoes in a brown bag. He'd bring some cucumber seeds, and he'd really quickly sort of turn the ground, get the plants in. And that was really my first exposure. And that's part of what I'm trying to do now is get people to try gardening, because you don't know if you're going to like it or love it or have a passion for it unless you try it. So he got me started around second grade, and it kind of ignited a passion. So it stayed with me. And of course, as a kid, I loved planting, loved picking stuff, hated weeding and stuff like that. So never really got fully into it, but enough that I was like, this is wonderful. And then when I got married, got space, I started with a townhouse, got some tomatoes in, grew on a balcony. And every time, I kind of moved to a little bit bigger house, I expanded the gardening. And really for a good 15 years now, I've been gardening in, open space on land and just having a great time.
Excellent, excellent. And so you got started when you were younger. You moved, and it kind of developed a little bit more as you got to be older. What is it that you really enjoy most about that whole gardening experience that kind of kept you growing into your adult years?
I think about this a lot. It's you really have a blank canvas. Like I kind of see gardeners as artists, and you get to go out there with the miracle of seeds. I can hold 10,000 pounds of food in my hand in seeds.
Yes.
So we get to go out. It's amazing, right?
It is.
And I can kind of just plant what I like. I get to watch it grow. It's rewarding in a sense. My energy starts turning ground, maybe. Put in the seed, and then months later, you've got beautiful plants that you can share that, with family and friends. And I don't think anything really beats it. I mean, it's an opportunity to really create in nature.
Yeah, and again, it's just really amazing. I think one of the real fascinating things for me, and I've shared before on the show here, is that I started my love for plants in a sense started when I was younger. My mother was she just grew tons of house plants. We never really had an outdoor vegetable garden or anything like that, but I got to learn to propagate and grow a lot of different indoor plants growing up, and I carried that on into my adulthood, and continue today. As you can see in the background, I love the house is full of house plants. I still really enjoy that a lot. But when I took, like you were saying, learning that fascination of taking just this little seed, this little, just this little thing, putting it in some soil and then watching it grow, and after I got to grow my first vegetable plant on a balcony on an apartment that I lived in, my fascination with all of that really just kind of just exploded. And I was lucky enough to be able to move from that space into a little bit bigger space, still kind of small, but a bigger space. And when and that's the thing, when you get you get a real passion for growing, and that starts to develop, you can really find yourself, even no matter how much space you have, with just not enough.
Right.
Right.
I know what you're going to say. Exactly. You're always, you put in 20 tomato plants, then you're thinking, well, there's 4 I found on sale somewhere. I need to fit them in somewhere. So you're always expanding and maximizing.
Yeah, and I'm always finding myself not being able to get everything I quite want into my garden each year, because I've filled it with all of these other things, and there's always new things that come up too every single year that you want to get put into your garden and all of that as well too. But again, it's just that experience that you get, and we touched on that too again, and it just seems to be something that kind of shows up with most of our different interviews with the other gardeners we talk with, is that kind of peace and serenity and those sort of things that you get from growing a garden. I think that's one of those first things of value that I think I started getting out of my garden, even more so than the food I was growing, was just just this not just a connection with, the growing space, the earth, the soil, all of that sort of stuff, but also just a better connection with myself and who, what my place in the world is as well too.
Yeah. I mean, I also have, I'm a mental health therapist by trade. So I worked at Johns Hopkins for 15 years and helped people that had major mental illnesses. One of the things that all people lack are just great activities, Nothing
Yeah.
good happens sitting on the couch for 6 hours. So if you can get out into the garden, everything you're talking about kind of blooms in the garden, so to speak. Just serenity, peace of mind, just, focusing all your senses on what you're doing in the earth and the smells of the tomato plant. It's just very relaxing and rewarding on so many scales beyond picking that tomato, like you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, it is too, and I think a lot of people really get that from gardening, and I think it's probably one of the reasons why it's one of those things that's just really kind of, I mean, I'd say, pretty good sized gardening community prior to what happened with the pandemic. But since that began, I think that people really connected with that when they had that, it was really kind of their only opportunity to get out and do something was to kind of be in their yards and be in these spaces and developing gardening, and I think it's really kind of exploded in that sense because that's really one of those initial values you get from the experience.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that, nothing good really comes out of the pandemic, except people did have that opportunity to do something maybe they just were never taught. Because, I don't want to get on my soapbox about our
Right.
society. I think it's wonderful, but we lose track sometimes of not the simple things, because gardening isn't simple, but it's just a simpler way of life for your wellness and your health and everything that we're talking about. It's just getting out there. And it could be small, it could be big, it doesn't matter. It's the act of growing that just is really rewarding. And that's something I try and stress to people. Like when I do videos and show my garden now, I show it in disarray because I felt like
Yeah.
when I used to show it all nice and clean and perfect, it was stressing people out because they were like, my garden has to look this way. And my garden doesn't, a lot of the times,
Yeah.
but most of the times it's a mess. So that's how it is. But it's still a beautiful place. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, I've been following you in your channel and all of your great gardening advice. In fact, just earlier in the show, I have a little segment called In the Garden, and we started that segment out by showing people my garden seedlings that I've been growing indoors under lights in this really cool PVC built apparatus and shop lights and all of that. And I do believe that was one of my very first videos of yours that I watched. It was complete. That whole garden state or plant starting station was inspired by one of your videos early on that I saw, and I've been kind of following your channel and all of your gardening experience since then, and gotten so much out of what you do. I mean, you really have created a really great channel with lots of great information. And also kind of one of the things I mentioned in your bio though too is it's just, you really discuss and cover things in real detail, and really kind of give a really, really good information on all sorts of stuff. What really kind of inspired you, ultimately to take, your gardening experience and start sharing that on YouTube?
It was really the fact that YouTube came into existence, maybe 15 years ago. And I was really like, what is this, this YouTube, to really age myself.
Yeah.
And I decided to make a video because it's something I like, kind of creativity and art wise. But I do have a passion for teaching, and I thought it'd be a great platform to try and create my own style, point of view. Not me talking 15 minutes about nothing and then saying, here's how you put the cucumber seed in. My videos are really focused on 5 minutes, 10 minutes, showing the person hopefully what they want to learn. And then I have a rambling series where I do a long-winded video. But really trying to get teaching down sort of to a quick science so that people could get what they need, get back out into the garden. And then I started really enjoying hearing the comments from people about what was helpful or what they're growing in the garden or their feedback on how I could do something better. And I discovered gardeners generally, they're a wonderful group of people. Like you don't really find bitter gardeners around, and it's such a good community, and it just kind of kept me going. So it's, I mean, I can't sit still, so it's good for me to be able to grab a camera, go out in the garden, do some video, do the garden work, and then I just load it up and have fun with it. And it started as a passion. Like my goal was never to get X amount of followers. Although I
Mhm.
always thought it'd be cool if I have 100, maybe I can get to 500. That's just kind of fun. But it just took off, and now this is what I do full time.
Yeah, I remember back when you got your first 100,000 subscribers.
Yeah.
That was a really cool celebration. And what are you at now? I mean, you're marching towards 700,000, which is really great, which, is, a testament to what you're doing. A lot of people are getting a lot of value out of the information that you're putting into the work you do and sharing your videos and all of that. I'm one of them. We've got, several people here in the chat, who've talked about how much they've gotten from your channel as well too. So really great work and all of that. So out of all the things that you're doing in your garden and all of that, because I know you cover so many things and all of that, what are some of your favorite things in the garden to grow?
So, I mean, that is another good question, which always changes. And I had to think. I actually just like the act of growing. So I
Yeah.
love placing the plants in a design and seeing what comes to be. So I have lots of different trellising. So I love building. I have a cattle panel trellis. It's 4 feet wide, two of them next to each other, so it's 8 feet wide. 8 feet wide.
Yeah.
So I love setting that up with cherry tomatoes, and then the trellis gets covered with cherry tomatoes, and you can walk through the tunnel and come out the other end with a bowl of different colored cherry tomatoes. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff I like. So I like kind of getting everything into the ground, getting it set up, sort of having some creative design to it, and just really letting it grow. What I look forward to every year is tomato, cucumber, and onion salad, vinegar and oil,
Mm,
slicing that up fresh from the garden, and I look forward to that every year. If I could only grow maybe 3 things, that's what it would always be.
be those three, huh?
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Anything that you don't really grow or you've given up on growing or anything that's presented any sort of constant challenges for you?
Well, I was listening to you earlier talk about the cool weather crops going into the summer and how they're
Mm,
bulking, the broccoli and all that. So
yeah.
that was a challenge. Every year I try and do it, spring to summer. It does exactly what you said. It gets too warm. So I just wanted to let people know we could do that in a second season from late summer into fall. So if you have
Yeah.
trouble with the warmth coming in summer too quickly, you can grow those again. Nothing, I've had to figure out how to do things. Like I can't grow rhubarb. I just put it in again. One plant is dead, the other one's taking off. I used to not be
Right.
able to grow ginger. I figured that out. So I like kind of problem solving. And it might take 3 years to figure out the right location. And then, you move on to the next one.
Yeah, exactly. And I've talked about this before on the show as well too. One of my constant issues in or the things that I'm still working to try to figure out are brassicas. I just for some reason, they just give me the most trouble. I end up going to one of my local nurseries and getting starts because it's really my goal, kind of as we were saying earlier, to be able to start things from seed because I love the whole process of being able to do things from start to finish when it comes to growing things. But brassicas always seem to be an issue for me. But this year I've actually got some cabbages, which are really looking good, and the broccoli, which I ended up again going and getting starts. That's looking pretty good. But yeah, it's one of those things that, even though I'm not finding as much success with it, say over the last couple of seasons, I remain determined to be able to figure it out, to learn that process, and be able to have future successes when it comes to growing those sort of things.
Yeah, and you can, like a lot of people don't know, you can, you're not growing broccoli for this, but you can eat the leaves. You can eat the cabbage leaves before the head forms and stuff like that. So you'll definitely get something out of it, but it is kind of sticking with it and figuring it out. And just in case you were kind of talking about the difficulty with the brassicas, when you're seed starting them indoors, I just discovered this recently. If your temperatures are like in the upper 60s, they tend to get real leggy and floppy in the house. So
Yeah.
they do really well getting a cool period outside or being put outside at night. And that cold weather slows them down. So you get these really nice stocky transplants. But that's a good example. For years, I was growing them and I was like, I thought the lights were too close or there wasn't enough light. And then
Mm.
finally figured out it was just temperature. So they need much cooler nights as you're
Yeah.
growing by seeds to be nice and stocky and then, develop for your garden.
So probably maybe seed starting in like a covered environment or something like that, outdoors, kind of, not get them too cold, but get that cool temperatures for them.
Yeah, I think that works best because they can actually take a light frost and even a heavier freeze depending on their size. So they just love that cool weather, and that's what keeps them nice and stocky.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, it was last year I was growing broccoli in these wicking 5-gallon bucket containers, and I had a whole bunch of different broccolis and varieties growing, and we ended up getting this freeze that was kind of unexpected, and it lasted like the freeze must have lasted a couple of different days. And when you're you're growing something in a container like that versus the ground, that just becomes a solid rock. And I
Right.
was worried the whole time. I'm like, oh man, this thing's frozen solid. You can knock on the
Yeah.
soil and just like, and I was just really surprised that, come a week later, as that all thawed out and everything, that the broccoli just had no problem with it. Just, it thrived right through that whole situation. And again, something that, we're constantly learning about. But I was worried there for a minute that was going to actually be too cold for them.
They're solid. I mean, some of the plants would die out, but the broccoli, Brussels, cauliflower is a little bit weaker than broccoli. But I mean, it's a perfect example of why you can grow into winter because these plants can really take that cold.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a really great idea too. And as I was mentioning, I didn't have quite an opportunity this last year in order to do that sort of situation, as you're saying, use that second season on those, because of a situation I had here at home and whether or not I was going to be able to stay in my garden spaces. But that's ultimately the same goal this year, is to be able to do that sort of situation and try to find out, if I get better success in that second season with some of these greens and brassicas and things like that, as you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing too is just to throw in there an easy growing vegetable for new gardeners are radishes. Radishes you can grow.
Yes.
They will mature from germination in 25 to 40 days. So fall and even winters that are mild, you can keep the radishes going.
Yeah, they're actually one of those things that I always suggest to people if they're just getting started with gardening, because I think it's a really good to like get and grow certain things, not only that you're going to like and enjoy, but also grow some things that you're going to get some successes with. Early successes help kind of keep you going with certain things, and I think radishes, or even if you're, growing with children and you're wanting to teach children
Mhm.
to, about gardening and all of that, because of how quick they are, like you said, you know, uh, a quick turnaround on growing something from a seed to, pulling it out of the ground is, a really great thing when you're growing with kids, and also again to get those early successes. So they're not hard to grow. I mean, I just take my radish seeds and I just pretty much toss them into wherever I'm going to grow them. They pretty much take care of themselves, and I just thin them out a little bit later on, and that's the only thing I really have to do for those.
Now, some people, I'm going to say, so when we were talking about things that are hard, for years, all I grew was leafy greens and no
Hmm.
radish. And I was over fertilizing, you can use compost and a little bit of fertilizer, but I was just
Yeah.
jacking the nitrogen up so much that I never was getting the bulbs. And just like you said, if you're just scattering them and throwing them and kind of letting them go, that's what radishes love best. And you get a nice radish that way. They just don't need really any kind of feeding.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and again, too, maybe we can touch on that a little bit too, is that idea of, there's so many things out there when it comes to, amendments and things like that we can put
Mhm.
into our gardens and all of that. But really, gardening can be a lot more simplified by not really worrying about a lot of these sort of, I don't know how to say it, things that these products and things that are out there, because all you really do need for most successes in the garden is some, either some compost, simple things like worm castings are really great and that sort of stuff. And really all I ever use just a couple of times a year in my garden, besides compost and worm castings, is just just kind of a balanced dry organic fertilizer. And I just kind of spread that around a little bit, and I always find that I don't need anything more really, and I don't need to put too much thought into these all these other amendments that they have out there.
Well, I call that the commercial world of vegetable gardening. And
Hmm.
in the beginning, when I was doing this, I am guilty of maybe sort of being brainwashed into that needing more. So I've simplified, just like you said. And a great example is when you go to a big box store and you see the organic dry fertilizer, which is what you're talking about. And I agree, you just need one bag. Whatever's on sale, it's always the same stuff. But you'll see tomato tone, you'll see plant tone, you'll see flowering, fertilizer, you'll see leafy green, you'll see pepper, you'll see like 13 different bags of fertilizer with the NP and K might be like a 642 or a 353. We don't need to worry about that. The garden, buy any bag, whatever's on sale, use that. You don't need specialized fertilizers. And the reason I bring that up a lot is because sometimes the barriers for new gardeners to get involved is they think they need all these products, and you just don't, And so I like to kind of challenge people. Of course, if you do a little more phosphorus, a little more potassium, you might get more blooms. Or as you get better at gardening and more experience and you want to tweak fertilizers, that's fine. But to get started, you don't need that. The dry granular, a basic water soluble, and like you said, if you can make compost, use compost. It's well below a 111 NP and K, gives your soil everything it needs, the plants everything you need, and you're golden using that.
Yeah, that's and fertilizers is one, but all sorts of different things. I mean, when I think it can be a real deterrence to a lot of people when they look at all of these various garden products and all these sort of things that are out there, and you can. I mean, if you're just really going wild with a lot of those sort of things, you can end up spending a lot more
Right.
on all of these other things than what you're going to be getting out of your garden. And gardening can be really inexpensive, and probably really ultimately should be, without all of these other just all of this stuff that's out there. Garden industry is a huge industry. It's billions and billions of dollars of all sorts of things that we probably just don't need. Just some simple boxes, some simple containers, creating a simple compost pile, and again too, like you're saying, whatever kind of balanced dry organic fertilizer, just to give a little bit of food. But if you're doing things right in your garden and you're keeping things kind of simple in an organic way like that, that soil life is going to build itself and really kind of create the sustained environment to create successful plants.
And I'm always respectful that not everybody. I mean, I started with a townhouse with a little shade and a deck, so I couldn't have a compost pile. But you can also, if you're not putting any chemicals on your grass, when you take your cuttings, just put an inch or two of the fresh cuttings on your beds, let them dry, turn brown, then you put another inch or two on. That is actually a way to compost right around the beds. Keeps moisture in, the plants love it. Soil life, worms chew it down, break it down, and you're actually composting slowly over the season. Just make sure you're not spraying weed and feed or anything into your lawn, because that can transfer over to your garden and impact your plants.
Yeah, just use that as a mulch, basically. Help build the soil life, and then again, like you said, it just will break down, go right into your garden, as well as some people use like wood chips and things like that as well. Just some good organic mulches that'll just kind of break down and help create and sustain good soil life.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's something you don't have to learn everything about gardening when you get started. Just get started, and you'll learn all these pieces that build a wonderful soil, that build a wonderful, garden for your plants.
Yeah, exactly. And as I mentioned earlier too, gardening is a constant learning process. And again too, there's there's not too many things that are really hard and fast when it comes to gardening. There's a lot of give and take when it comes to experimenting and trying and doing different things. And I think that's really important for people as they're growing in their gardens to, kind of, because we all grow in different places, in different environments and climates and all that sort of stuff too. So what works for me might not exactly work for you that well, but getting out and trying things is probably the best bet for, you know, trying to figure out how it's done and how it grows and get some of those, early and long-term successes.
Yeah, I mean, I think use your information, my channel, whatever you find online to get you going in the right direction. But
Mhm.
just you're going to veer, but as long as you're going in that direction, you're going to get something out of your garden, and you can always adapt and change it up the next year.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, and once you start figuring things out, once you start getting some successes, those are things that you just build on, year in, year out. And again, like we also mentioned too, one of the biggest things I always recommend to people, even though you're so tempted to grow anything and everything that's out there, try to keep it a little bit simple too when you're getting
Yeah,
started as well, because building off of successes and expanding is the best way to go.
I agree. I agree.
Awesome. Awesome. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned there too, actually, just a minute ago that you were, and I remember first starting watching your channel that you had like a balcony and you had some kind of a cool little small backyard kind of space that
Mhm.
you had, but you've taken and moved from that space now into a much larger space. You want to talk a little bit about that move and your newer spaces that you're growing in?
Yeah. So my kids moved on to college and stuff and out of state. And about that time, my wife and I were like, well, let's move, because they're going to be different places. So I was lucky enough after, saving and doing things for, a couple decades to move to 2 acres. I'm in a 1867 farmhouse that we upgraded and stuff. And I got this perfect rectangular property where I could take everything I did before and kind of create from a blank slate. So I've had a great time designing the fencing, the garden beds. I have 2 gardens, actually. Then I have a bunch of edible landscapes, um, a little wooded area. I've got an orchard going, enough to keep me busy and overwhelmed in a good way. Um, and now I have tons of compost. And that's why I'm always sensitive to compost because I never had the space.
Yeah.
But I'm always like, well, what kind of channel would I be now if I came on and said, just make your own compost, put 6 inches in your bed, walk away, you're done. You're wasting money. But you can't do that because, like you were saying, all of our gardens are different. We're all coming from different places to grow, different budgets, different amounts of time.
Mhm.
So my goal is to help people just enjoy growing plants to whatever fits into their lifestyle. In my book, the Modern Homestead Garden, it was kind of taking modern life into, I don't know what's the right word. Well, just being
Mhm.
practical. You got your modern life, but
Yeah.
you can sort of go back to having a garden. But how do you kind of blend it into, our current society right now? And, the short version is you do it at your own pace, and you learn the skills and you do more. And when you can expand, you get bigger. But just start somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just get started. As we say here, let's get growing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So, in fact, you touched on it there too. Let's talk a little bit about, in fact, I got my own copy right here, The Modern Homestead Garden. So, what kind of inspired you to write a book of all things to do? Can't
Yeah.
imagine that it took up some good time trying to get
It's a great experience when you're done.
when you're done
It's
is what I
yeah,
hear from a lot of
when
the
you're
authors
done,
we've had.
it's a great experience. But the publishing company and the people are wonderful. And it was actually at the height of COVID, so it was a stressful time. But the book was finished, and it was really designed a little bit what I'm having trouble saying. I don't know why, but it's taking modern life, blending it with gardening, and it creates your homestead. And it's really about a different perspective. Instead of waking up, go to work, buying food at a grocery store, going out to eat, going to sleep, waking up, rinse and repeat, how can you integrate a homestead, mentality into your life? As little as,
Yeah.
or a little, piece, maybe it's a windowsill or, your deck or something. How do you incorporate that into your life so that, no, you're not living out of your garden, you're not going off grid, but maybe you're adding herbs to your dishes, or maybe you're adding, a side dish eventually, or maybe you're creating salads. But just bringing the idea of your home is your homestead, not just a place to wake up, go to sleep, go to work, come back, and just have fun with it. And the book shows you how to do things on different scale: container gardening, larger scale gardening, herbs, just about everything. And it kind of mirrors my channel too, with all the stuff that I teach on there. But it's a nice place to have all the information to really get started and, have the confidence to feel like you can grow something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really great book. And again, like all of the different things that you have on your channel and all the information, just really good stuff. And it's a great place for folks to get a lot of good advice. And talking about advice, you got any good advice or tips or anything for someone who's just getting started gardening?
So you kind of mentioned it already, and it's don't overplant. So that's the first thing, is don't overplant your first year, because you have to imagine you're going to be into July and August when your plants are big and you have to tend and care for them. So you may want to grow 6 or 8 tomato plants, maybe start with 3. And just try and keep it a little bit simpler to start so you can kind of see the whole process. With that being said, too, if you're growing in containers, the biggest mistake people make is, you have a nice little tiny tomato seedling that's about 8 inches tall, and then you get this pot that's maybe 12 inches wide and 12 inches deep, and they look perfect together to start. But in 6 or 8 weeks, that tomato plant, that root system is going to outgrow that pot. It's going to suck the nutrients out, the moisture out. You can water it, 3 hours later, it's dry again. So you really have to match the pot size to the mature size of your tomato plant or the vegetables that you're growing. And some of that, you can check my channel out for that, or you can look for different places. But you always want to be thinking about, how big is this plant going to be when it's mature? Can I tend it? And is it in the right pot? And that's probably 2 things I think that help gardeners out. The other thing I always talk about is there's no perfection. Like, the whole idea is to manage down pests, manage down diseases. The garden wants to give, it wants to grow, and you're going to get something out of it. But you can't get discouraged because you get powdery mildew or you get aphids. That's just something you have to learn. And every garden's going to have its own pests and problems. And that's part of what you have to learn too. So don't get it in your head that you're a failure or you're doing something wrong. Any garden, I always laugh, any gardener that says, just grow organic, I never have a pest or disease. Maybe there's truth to that, but it's because they probably have no pests or diseases in their area.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. You're going to get the problems.
Yeah, I grow organic and I get plenty of pests and plenty of diseases to deal with, all sorts of them. And again, like you said, it does depend on our space. It depends on, where we're growing, as far as specific climates and regions and things like that, on all what we're going to be dealing with. And similar to what we touched on earlier, one person might have, as Paul had earlier, voles that he deals with. I don't got voles I got to deal with. I don't got deer I got to deal with, but man, I can get an infestation of squash bugs like you wouldn't believe. We talked about earwigs. Oh my gosh, the most creepiest little bugs I got to deal with all over the place, all that stuff. Powdery mildew, as you mentioned, too, all sorts of things. But I think that's really great advice, though, too, and something that I try to, relate to people as well, too, especially if you're just getting started gardening, is that these are things that, are a part of the natural, system of, plants and gardens and things grown outdoors, is all of these sort of variables and, part of, I think, in a sense, the fun of learning about gardening is learning and dealing with some of these challenges. I mean, I try not to let it, break my heart too much, when the aphids tear something down or something, and I want to, or something got past me on some other sort of problem, is to, again, we talk about keeping garden journals here on my channel and stuff so that we can, keep good notes on, time of year when we're dealing with this stuff, and different methods that we've tried to, take care of them and work on that from a year to year basis.
I think that, I mean, that's perfect. I just want to highlight what you said. You don't know as a new gardener what's coming, but if you can take notes, like you said, and say, aphids show up this date, powdery mildew this date, then you can put a plan where you start spraying, 2 to 4 weeks before they typically show up. And then
Yeah.
you can manage down the destruction. But a lot of people, or manage down the damage. A lot of people don't keep that journal. So it's so important to take, because I can't
Mhm.
remember what I ate for dinner 2 or 3 days ago. So there's no way I'm going to remember next year when the aphids show up or something. So taking notes makes a huge difference. And also taking note on what you're spraying, what works and what doesn't work really makes
Yeah.
a difference. Because eventually you'll learn it's like these 2 diseases, these 3 pests, and then you figure out a way to work around it.
Yeah, and you might not get quite what you wanted or expected out of your garden for that season, but that's it's again too, there's one thing to be able to grow something from a seed, grow this plant up and be able to possibly harvest something out of it. There's a lot that we get out of that, but I think that in the longer run of the gardening experience, taking some of those things and challenges, we might not get the harvest we want. The plant might not be healthy enough, whether it's a disease or a pest or weather issues or, all the different variables. But when like I said, if you're keeping a proper journal and you start to defeat some of those things and you start getting successes because you've done that, that's another just empowerment of being a great gardener. Not necessarily a master gardener, but you're mastering gardening, in a sense by doing that, and that's really kind of fulfilling as well too.
Yeah, I think you master the space that you're growing in, and
Hmm.
you're not going to find
Exactly.
all that in videos and through reading and research. You'll have an idea. Like I don't get earwigs. I couldn't even probably pick one out to be honest with you, but people get them and they're terrible. I
Yeah,
just don't get them here
yeah,
for whatever reason. But
that's good.
yeah, so I'm grateful. I'm going to knock on wood because I said last year that I've never had a vole, and voles roll
Oh,
into my garden.
oh
So
my gosh,
they're okay
yeah.
now. Yeah. Um, but you're not going to know until you get growing. And I just want to add in too that some of the things you learn is like you say your cucumber plants go in May, the cucumber beetle comes about now, it wrecks them in June. You learn that you can use a dust and it controls the cucumber beetle. But you can also rip out that cucumber plant, put in transplants or new seeds, and you can plant through the cycles of insects and different diseases because they go away. And a lot of
Mhm.
people think, well, I lost, I failed, this cucumber's gone, and they get rid of it and they get discouraged. Well, just plant again, because that July planted seed for cucumbers will start producing at the end of July because it's so warm and it wants to grow, and it'll grow into
Yeah.
August. And you can plant again in August. So you can keep your crops, a lot of them rotating in, and you plant right through the problem cycles.
Yeah, exactly. And just another one of those things that's, fun to figure out and grow through the different experience and learning processes with all the sort of aspects of gardening, because there's a ton of aspects of gardening. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so much fun is that there is so much, as far as not just the varieties and the different things that we can grow, but the different methods and different, you know, uh, uh, styles of growing, all sorts of stuff. And it's just one of the things that makes the whole kind of gardening experience really fun and really kind of a little bit more on that is that I also kind of relate gardening to baseball. I'm a big
Right?
baseball fan, and or just most any sports is all is that we might not have the best season, with our team that year, but it's similar to gardening. There's always next year. And then there's all, that sort of thing. It's something that we get to do year in and year out. And, building on some of the successes we have this year can create an even more successes the next year. So again, don't get discouraged by the different situations you could deal with in your gardens.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one more thing I want to add that kind of goes with this and make something for new gardeners. When you create the organic sprays that you see online, and I always thank people for trusting me, always test spray, because I'm saying this from history, where I've made a spray and I've sprayed the entire plant, and then the next day I've defoliated it, like the leaves are dying. So as you're learning about your garden, even though a spray may work for me and it may work for you, for some reason it may not work in somebody else's garden, or you use the wrong soap, you use dish soap, while I'm using maybe the Castile type soaps or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, any spray a couple of leaves, wait 48 hours, see if it does any damage, and then go out and spray your plant. That will save you a lot of heartache. And just because the spray works on, say, a kale plant or the brassicas, which are really tough leaves and can take lots of sprays, you then may take that spray and say, well, I'll just spray it on my tomato plant. Well, those leaves are a little bit weaker. So you have to test the sprays on each of the different plant kind of varieties. And then once you get them, this is a spray I can use pretty regularly.
Yeah. You got any sprays you recommend? Any spray recipes or anything like that you use a lot?
I have a lot of them. If you go to my channel, I always say, please just watch the video, but I'll give you the recipe. I can show you too, but this is hydrogen peroxide, 3% hydrogen peroxide. If you spray that directly on your plants, you're going to defoliate. How do I know that? Because I did it. So 1 part hydrogen peroxide, 6 parts water makes a great spray to clean your tomato plants, and it stops early blight and leaf spot. So I can plant tomatoes much more closely nowadays. And please, the Rusted Garden, RUSTED. You can see my YouTube channel. Just look up hydrogen peroxide. I don't think it's because of my age. I think it's just because I always do it. I can't remember the recipes exactly. So they're all written on my sprayer. So when I go out, I have like peppermint oil, 2 tablespoons, or hydrogen peroxide, 1 to 6 ratio, or 6 to 1 water to hydrogen peroxide. But that's a good way to do it too. Is write it on the spray on the sprayer so that you don't mess up the routine. But hydrogen peroxide is wonderful. I think it can be used on all plants. I haven't tested it all out, but it's a really inexpensive way to manage stuff on your plant leaves.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah. I'm going to have to use a little bit more of that myself too. And as well as a lot of the other great advice that you give on your channel. It's just, again, like I said, I've been just a big fan of YouTube, gardeners and gardening, for, I don't know, I started my garden 13 years ago or so. It's been when I first started. After my first plant I grew on a balcony, and once I had that success with that plant, I immediately, again, like I said, wanted to grow everything and moved into a space where I could really start to expand my garden. But I utilized all of the great advice I got from all these different great gardeners on YouTube, and your channel was one of those first channels that I ran into and have kept coming back to in order to get some really great gardening advice. So as you can say, I've been kind of a fan for many years, and really appreciate everything that you do and taking the time you do to make your videos, writing a really great book. I would, actually, I did want to mention this. As you mentioned, you worked in the mental health space and all of that sort of stuff. And I think I've seen you post and talk about it before, but maybe that's a good suggestion for your next book. So writing a little bit about something like that.
Yeah. So I actually have another book coming out called Growing an Edible Landscape. That's going to be out in November.
Oh, awesome.
And I've kicked that. So, the short version is, you hook up with editors and book companies, and they kind of want you to write something that will hit the target audience. And I wanted to write a book that really highlighted how to grow, but also at the same time integrated how it benefits your mental health. So let's just say that's on the drawing board still.
Yeah.
But it might be something that I do independently, and I just write an ebook on it because I really believe in it. And it
Hmm.
doesn't have to be like mental health is not a mystical thing where you go into support groups and everything is, kind of gets that funky kind of stuff that people shy away from. Mental health is really part of your life. We all deal with anxiety and depression at different levels. We all um, need help at times. But a healthy activity like gardening pays dividends towards your wellness, towards your mental health, reducing anxiety, improving mood, and stuff like that. And I would just like to write it in a way that people feel comfortable, talking about it
Yeah.
and getting something out of it because it shouldn't be a mystery. It shouldn't be something people sweep under the rug. I'm,
Yeah.
I'm going to go breaking down my therapist soapbox, but there's
That's,
nobody's mental health that is always perfect. Just like there is
hmm.
never a perfect garden with no pests and disease.
Yeah.
It may look okay on the outside, but something's going on the inside. But gardening is a great way to really improve your wellness. So
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe it'll come out as an ebook or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, I really encourage it because I think you would probably be a really great person with some really great insights on that, on the mental health end of the gardening experience, and be able to really give some people some really good information when it comes to all of that too. And I would really look forward to something like that as well. And again, too, I want to encourage anybody who's watching the show to get down in the description below, find a link to Gary's channel, The Rusted Garden, and follow along with all of his really great gardening tips and all of the different things that he's got going on the channel there as well. And Gary, I really want to thank you for taking your time out of your weekend to join with us here on the show.
I had a great time. I'd love to come back in the future. This was a lot of fun. Aside from growing and creating, I love just talking about gardening. I just came from Freetown Farm where I volunteer.
Yeah,
Zipped over here, shot a quick video that's coming out later today on trellising. And
yeah.
I had a blast talking with you. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, you got a new book coming up. So after the new book or something like that, maybe we'll have to have you back on and talk about it as well.
Wonderful.
Awesome, Gary. Thanks again. And again, everybody, get down below. Check out the link to his channel. Go check him out. Gary, we'll see you again soon.
Have a great week.
Thank you. Hey, gardeners. Thanks for tuning in to our show today. We'll be right back at it here in just a moment. I just wanted to take a second here to highlight our regular videos and features here on the Urban Gardener channel. Our weekly garden journals, and our incredible feature visits. All right, excellent. Another really great show this week here. Really couple of great conversations with Paul from Guten Gardening, talking about all of his great things going on with him and his garden and garden experience. It's one of the things I just really, really enjoy about this show, is be able to just have these really great discussions that, not just about the things that we've got growing on in our garden, but, all of these different things and aspects of the gardening experience that a lot of us in the gardening community love sharing with everybody. And also, talking to Gary Pilarchik. I mean, really, that's a big one. I mean, I was really excited all week, or even since I actually had him booked to be on the show. I've just been really excited to be able to talk with him, as being someone that I've followed for many years, and to just get to have a great conversation about gardening and the whole, again, gardening experience. And that's just one of the things that we just really love about this show. And the reason why I started this whole show was to be able to have these really fun conversations with all of these. There's so many really amazing gardeners out in the gardening community. And I just, I'm a big fan of so many people. I follow so much going on. And, again, too, one of those things, and I'll even share this with everybody as well, too, is there's a lot of things going on with social media, and there's a lot of places and things that just, aren't really the best for us to be spending our time in. And I hear all the time from people who are quitting either Facebook or quitting Instagram or doing these things because it just becomes too toxic or negative for them. Well, one of the strategies that I did, because I'm such a big fan of the gardening community and all of that sort of stuff, is I all I do is I push that stuff out. I block all of that negative stuff out of all of my feeds, and I keep all of these great gardeners and all of these different gardening pages and channels and authors and podcasters, and just all these different people are in what I see every day when I open up any of one of my social medias. And that's I think a really great piece of advice is just kind of surround yourself with your community. And I don't think there's a better community out there than the gardening community. Just so many wonderful people who are just so willing to share the experience and the enjoyment that they get from gardening. And again, one of the I just can't recommend enough is all of the different things that we've got growing on here with our channel and all of the different people that we get to talk to. So please, everybody, if you can, to like, subscribe, and share our channel to everybody out there and all of your gardening friends. And be sure to make sure that everybody knows what we got going on here each week with all of these great conversations with everybody. And also, again, to be sure to stop by and check out our website, the Let's Get Growing.live. And yeah, and also, as I like to mention too, Ivy Organics is our sponsor of the show. And be sure to go to ivyorganics.com. And they do have a really good, well-balanced, dry organic fertilizer, as we were talking about in the previous conversation with Gary. And I think that's a really great one. It's doing really, really awesome things for our garden. So I really highly recommend that to you in your garden as well, too, as their 3-in-1 plant guard that they have as well, if you're growing any trees or any things like that as well, too. And creates just some really great plants. And as they say, they grow really cool plants at Ivy Organics. You can grow really cool plants yourself. And be sure to use our promo code GROW10 in their shop to save 10% off of everything that they got growing on there too. So again, I want to thank Paul from Guten Gardening, Gary Pilarchik of the Rusted Garden for joining with us today. And next week, oh gosh, you want to talk about exciting? I get excited, I think, every week for every guest that we have. But I first started following next week's guest when I think I was late teens, in my early 20s. He does a radio show out of the Pacific Northwest in the Seattle area, as well as he's on all of the different news channels and all of that, doing different garden segments and all of that. And he's a really great character. He's probably one of the funniest people that I know when it comes to gardening and giving gardening advice. And that's Cisco Morris. So we're gonna have Cisco Morris on the show next week. I'm really excited about that. So you'll want to tune in next week to check out that great conversation as well too. And also be sure follow all the links down below in the description to today's guests, next week's guests, and also there's a link down there in the description to our Facebook group, the Let's Get Growing group. I really think that we have a great gardening community here on the Urban Gardener channel and the Let's Get Growing show. And if you haven't yet joined, so if you're here in the chat box right now and you haven't joined with us on the Let's Get Growing group, get down in the description below, follow the link to our Facebook group, join with us, share all of your awesome gardening pictures and experience and all of those sort of things with everybody in our group. And yeah, just be really wonderful to have you all along with us on our group there. And we look forward to seeing you there as well as this next week too for our next show. So again, from all of us here at Let's Get Growing, you have a great week, and we'll see you all this next Saturday.